Thank you, David. This was a little more formal than I thought it would be. I thought we would be walking around, but then, as some of you know, I tend to speak softly anyway, so maybe a microphone is for everybody's advantage, but we'll see how it goes. I don't know how many of you know John, but John was born in 1934, so that puts him into his 70s. But the thing is, he's of the same generation as U.S.A. and Guido Molinari and Claude Toussaint. He's the same generation as the plasticiens in Montreal, who came into maturity in the 60s with hard edge, razor edge, one might say, color field painting. So that's his generation, but the quite surprising thing is that John's work looks nothing like that. He had much admired U.S.A. He admired U.S.A., as he said, for his certainty and for his transcendence. And yet, where U.S.A. was precise and formal, John is informal and casual, and the work seems, certainly at first glance, kind of nonchalant. And John also, if you meet him, seems kind of more like a retired English professor than he does the kind of artist who you would also find behind a drum set playing free jazz in the bars late at night, or as he'll be doing, giving a concert here next Thursday as well. So, so those of you interested in that sort of thing would just get a sense of the other side, though it isn't really an other side of artistic his career, because all these kinds of working are quite intimately interconnected. But in comparison to a Gaucher or a Molinari, and you all had a chance to walk around, I hope you have anyway, what perhaps strikes one first as being surprising is that there's nothing, seems to be nothing particularly precise or pristine here, that the canvases have been, they're unstretched, they've never been stretched usually, they're soiled, they're stained, they're distressed, they're weathered. They seem somehow haphazardly to hang over one another, overlap one another, hide things. And if you've seen the videotape, you should look at the videotape of the film by Sylvia Safdie out in the lobby, which gives you an idea of how John works, how he, to distress his canvases, he waters them, he drags them around. His methods seem brutal in comparison to some of this often, or most often, very delicate results that come out of that. He was considered himself self-taught. He certainly had not imagined becoming an artist in his youth or into his 20s. Didn't think he had that kind of ability. But he did grow up in a thoroughly artistic climate. His aunt was Prudence Heward, and he certainly remembers his aunt, who had a studio on the top floor of his grandparents' house, and how he traipsed up and down the stairs to visit her. It was a house because Prudence was part of the Canadian group of painters in the Beaver Hall group, so it was full of paintings, full of Group of 7 paintings, and Lauren Harris and A.Y. Jackson, amongst others, were fairly regular visitors. So he was intimate in a way to the Montreal art world and well informed. He began his education, at least his undergraduate education, studying literature at the Literature Bishops College in Lennoxville. Started an MA in literature at McGill, but somehow decided the academic career was not for him, so he headed out for Britain, where he went into publishing and joined Penguin, and worked for Penguin for several years. Came back to Canada, did some design work, working on Expo in '67, and a colleague that he was working with suggested that, maybe he should have a go at this, trying to be an artist, and John then made the decision that something that I think he had kept at the back of his mind, but always, or maybe was just waiting for the moment when it might emerge, as it did in the first work. I guess he calls it his very first work, is that portrait of Mingus over in the corner, the very dark one, which is kind of a surprise because it, and he calls it his talisman. This is where he argues that all the rest of it came from. And as I say, a little surprising because after all, it's a fairly standard image on a stretched canvas. It even has a little frame around it. But we talked about it a little bit on opening night here when we were also put up here to have a little discussion. And there are a lot of kind of valencies that he picked out of it. Of course, Mingus and his interest in jazz, Mingus as an improvisator musician. The mask itself, which this was before he started collecting tribal African masks, which he now collects and which his studio are full of. He puts the origin of the image more to a portrait by Carol Appel of the Cobra group of Herbert Reed, which then used to hang fairly regularly in the collection of the Montreal Museum. And that portrait is a very abstracted one of sort of Reed as I recall now, an intense red-orange kind of blob and other details filled in. But you know what Cobra painting looks like. So, and then the idea of masking, which we will touch on some more. Then the exhibition kind of samples along the way, and if we wanted to jump to the next work, it would be that landscape over there from 1972, or landscape structure as he calls it. And you'll see it's a kind of bagged landscape, so it's a combination, and it's a little padded and bagged. So what is it? A combination of Klaus Oldenburg and Ian Baxter. You remember Ian Baxter's bagged place that he did at U.B.C. It must have been in 1966 or 67. But it has other implications. The folds almost look as if they come about because it's been rolled to be stored that way, but he kind of enforced them. And that little patch that hangs up above with a little sort of chiaroscuro effect here looks almost like it could be a faded photograph or something like that of a landscape with a horizon line. And in fact, he did imagine the folds as somehow being elements of the landscape receding into space. So he wanted the double reading. And Heward is always full of double or triple readings. There's never one way to fix them down. So it's both image, shall we say, both image and object simultaneously, or one after the other, depending on how we choose to focus at the moment of looking. There's the portrait part of the Mingus, which sits on either side of it. It's flanked by two paintings that John calls self-portraits. And John has painted self-portraits throughout his painting career. The remarkable thing about which, of course, they don't look like John at all. So they're not portraits in the usual sense of the word, but he certainly, they're portraits also in the sense of being masks, and well, you know, portraiture is a kind of complicated give and take between being realistic and being idealistic, between exposure